Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. I thought we would start at 3 or 5, but because of the response that we are seeing, I think it's time to now get started. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm Namrata, and I lead field marketing here at Exitel. We actually launched this webinar 3 weeks before. We brainstormed on the response that we were seeing in the market, and the overwhelming response that we have received. It actually showcases the relevance and the impact that this topic has. Before I move on to do a speaker introduction, I just wanted to do some, context setting about this webinar and the topic. So what we figured was these regulations which are tightening and oversight increasing, the BFSI sector primarily is juggling with compliance while keeping customer interaction and communication smooth. So from RBI's digital lending guidelines to new data protection rules and consent management, businesses are having to adapt fast. And that's what we are here to discuss. So join us today as we break down these regulatory shifts which we are seeing, covering key frameworks and RBI's latest directives, and explore some practical strategies to stay compliant while enhancing customer engagement as well as customer communication. And before I hand it over to the speakers, let me do a very quick introduction of the two very interesting people whom we have on board. Vivek Jatana, Vice President, New Initiatives Technology. Vivek Jatana, with over 2 decades in ICT, ISPs, and telecom, he is a seasoned leader in network planning, product strategy, and business growth. His expertise spans regulatory compliance, interconnect agreements, and P&L management. A strategic thinker, he drives technology enablement, automation, and solution positioning to strengthen Exotel's market leadership. So that's Vivek here with us. I would also like to introduce Adya Mishra. Adya Mishra is a partner with Spice Root Legal's technology, media, and telecommunications practice with a specialized focus on technology, telecom, and data protection. She has assisted businesses across India, South Asia, US, UK, Europe with structuring their operations to comply with these laws. And Adya's work involves regulatory advice, product structuring, framing operational and compliance strategies, and management of incidents. This was a perfect platform to have her here so that we can give the perspective from Exitel as well as from the legal aspect. So without delaying it any further, we would like to get started. So I'd like to hand it over to Adya to take it from here. So Adya, over to you.
Thank you.
Also, sorry, just one more thing, everyone. We will be taking the questions at about 3:45. So please feel free to post the questions in the chat box, which we will take it up towards the end of the webinar. Yeah, Adya, sorry, over to you.
Thank you so much, Namrata. It's great to be here and welcome everybody. Vivek, so I look forward to this session. So how I thought we could do this is we've split the session up into smaller segments. I will start off by maybe introducing the regulatory landscape. Earlier this month or last month, actually, there have been some new, amendments from the Department of Telecommunication and TRI. So useful to take that into account as well when we're talking about the general regulatory concerns and compliance challenges that we see, specifically with respect to the BFSI sector, when it comes to sending commercial communication, right? Almost all the companies we work with have been plagued with this problem. So again, please bear with me because I think it's useful to set the context. And also it's useful to look at the historical significance of what is happening here and how challenging it has been to manage commercial communication, right? So maybe to take a couple of steps back, look at the history. Since about 2007, the government and the Department of Telecommunication has actually been grappling with how do you prevent things like pesky telemarketing calls, right? How do you not irritate consumers and how do you protect consumers from the evolving techniques and spam and cybersecurity attacks that are evolving through telecom resources? So since 2007, where you had the first national do not call, registry, then you had a session in 2010 where the government introduced the National Customer Preference Register. all of which try to, in their own ways, regulate either telemarketing calls or promotional calls and introduce some form of enforcement. For better or for worse, those regulations did not work. So in 2018, you had a fairly, at that point in time, I'd say cutting edge, thought process where the government devised a co-regulatory regime with telecom service providers that was based on blockchain or distributed ledger technology. Effectively, what happened in 2018 is the telecom service providers were given a chance to use blockchain technology to start regulating commercial communication that was either issued through SMSs and issued through phone calls. Now, again, the definition of commercial communication is wide. It includes voice calls, it includes SMSs that use telecom networks, and where the primary purpose is used to advertise a solicit business. And what you have seen since 2018 is with varying degrees of success, we have seen the DOT and we have seen try to curb the menace of unsolicited commercial communication. And unsolicited commercial communication is basically anything that does not follow the requirements that have been issued by the telecom customer consumer preference and their choices, right? So that's what we are seeing right now. I'll be very upfront and blunt here. It's also that the attempt to regulate this industry and commercial communication in general has been met with some hits and some misses also, right? What we have seen is a fairly complex landscape. There's a lot of uncertainty around it. The regulations by themselves keep changing. So every time we're trying to evolve compliance strategies, there are a lot of questions that arise. And as a lawyer and, coupled with Vivek sir's experience in this segment, I'm hoping we can try and address some of it. But just a quick caveat there, right? Now, there are two or three things that I think are, again, useful to set out in terms of context, which is that you've got phone calls that are regulated, you've got SMSs that are regulated, and you've got a large chunk of commercial communication that is outside the scope of these regulations. That's not without some effort to try and regulate these players, but let me take the exceptions first, which is communication that is sent through OTT platforms or VoIP calls or internet communication or emails do not fall within the regulatory scope of the TCC/CBR. So what you are also seeing right now is that, your kind of commercial communication and marketing material through tools like WhatsApp have got increasingly sophisticated, and those work outside the regulatory ambit. How your customer preferences and those kind of options work from a legal perspective is they apply when somebody makes a phone call to you via a telecom resource or they send you an SMS via a telecom resource. There are questions of whether a B2B transaction and a B2C transaction both fall within the scope of the regulation. And in different contexts and with different nuances, I would believe that these regulations would continue to apply to specific types of B2B transactions. The big loophole, of course, is that OTT platforms fall outside the scope of these regulations. But what we are seeing increasingly, and this is I'd say a national phenomenon, where there is a growing move to bring OTT platforms like WhatsApp and Truecaller, etc., within the scope of the DOT and TRI's regulatory ambit. Now, in Feb, you had a new set of amendments which change the existing 2018 regulations quite significantly. Do keep in mind that, there's certain provisions that will come into force over the next month or so. But I think it's very useful for anybody thinking about compliance to divide the kind of commercial communication you have into three broad buckets. That becomes important because the way you take consent or your corresponding compliance requirements change based on the type of communication that you are sending. I also want to point out that what these 2025 amendments have done is, I think, in a lot of ways legitimized what was a slight question mark from a regulatory perspective before the amendment. And let me take you through everything before jumping the gun, right? Effectively, you have transactional communication, you've got promotional communication, and you've got service communication or service messages, right? I will take promotional messages first because those are firstly the peskiest, and secondly, the hardest when it comes to managing compliance. Now, a promotional communication, and please remember this can include both phone calls and this can also include SMSs, is a communication that contains promotional material or advertisements for a product or service. This is again wide, it's also very context driven. What I have seen with several businesses personally is trying to evolve compliance strategies where you try to hide a promotional message under a separate category to sidestep certain requirements. I think the law has become much clearer right now is that promotional communication, in most cases, requires a business to first scrub their preference registers to see if users have blocked their preference or not. If the users have blocked preferences, so the way to think about it is if I'm a shopping or if I'm a retail company and I'm trying to send shopping marketing material to an end user, and I run through their preference register and run my scrubbing functions and find that their preferences are blocked to receive shopping messages, I can take their consent. If they provide consent, then I can go ahead and send them commercial communication or promotional messages. You've got the next category, which is transactional communication. Now, a transactional communication is any call or a message that is initiated by a sender in response to a transaction initiated by a customer. I want to complete a banking transaction on an e-commerce website and an OTP is issued to me. That's an example of a transactional communication. I withdraw money and I get a message. That's a transactional communication. What is very, very, sorry, Vivek, were you saying something? Okay. So one quick point is that transactional communication was prior to the 2025 amendment reserved for the BFSI sector. That has slightly expanded now post the 2025 amendment and applies to all types of industries. What is important is that the transactional communication must be sent within 30 minutes of a transaction initiation. So that's a transactional communication. We've touched upon promotional, we've touched upon transactional. And now what you're left with is a service communication. A service communication is, I think, where I have personally, from a compliance perspective, seen the most amount of, for the lack of a better term, mischief. But a service communication is of two types, where it comes down to facilitating or completing a commercial transaction that involves an ongoing purchase or use by an end user of a product or sender. So an example of a service communication is, for example, me reminding you of, say, your warranties, me providing you with certain information. And again, service communications are divided into two types. There's certain service messages that do not require an end user to provide explicit consent. So for example, in my previous example, if I'm trying to send you a warranty message, I do not need your explicit consent. However, if I'm trying to nudge you into finishing a transaction, or I want to remind you that your cart is currently half filled and you should complete that transaction, you would need explicit consent of the end user. Again, remember the way you categorize your communication becomes very important because your compliance strategies differ. What it comes down to is there are a couple of questions you should be asking yourself. What is the communication intended to facilitate? Do I or do I not need consent? And if I do need consent, what is the best way to achieve this? Now, I think another important part of the 2025 amendment is that for the first time, and I think this is in a very formal process, you are seeing voice calls being regulated. It's not that they weren't regulated prior to 2025. It's just that most of the energy was focused on SMS regulation. A couple of things that are useful to flag is that there's been a lot of noise around the 140 and the 160 series that were introduced last year. But if you go back a few years, the 140 series actually applied for all types of voice calls. This has been in force since 2018. The question of whether it has actually been implemented or not is a longer question. Last year, the government issued the 160 series, which were intended to be, earmarked for transactional messages. There's been a lot of chaos and confusion around the 160 series, and there's been a rollback of sorts. And now what you have are the 1600 series. How it works is for transactional and service messages, you've got certain 1600 series that are reserved for companies. You do not need consent when you are making phone calls via the 1600 series. And if you are trying to make phone calls, transactional messages, or service communication outside of the 1600 series, you are running afoul of the TCCPR. The 160 series are in the process of getting operationalized, and there have been a lot of questions around that. Now, I've been talking for a few minutes, so I'm going to pause here. And Vivek, so I know, I will take up the other compliance requirements, but I'm just, I'm going to hand this over to you to get your perspective on how companies should think about implementing these requirements.
Sure. Thanks, Adya. So, at the outset, let me agree. We've been very critical of the governments most of the time, but let me agree that there's a lot of work which people are doing for consumer protection and fraud and spam. Is it going to come with some extra challenges for us? Yes. So we'll try to see and try to delve into the BFSI and their use cases and their network to see where all we can do some change. So beginning with one of the questions which comes up very, very often is cross-sell, upsell, transaction or service message, or is it a promotional message? There is sufficient clarity which has been given in the TCCPR guideline saying if you start a call as service or transaction and then you try to do upsell or cross-sell, they will still consider it as a promotional call. That's the first thing. I think one of the reason for that is, although 140 was implemented, most of the people tried to utilize normal number series and camouflage the promotional calls as service and transaction calls. So this time around, they have categorically mentioned that any upsell, cross-sell is going to be considered as a promotional call. Any non-commercial call. So for example, if you are talking to as a HR, you are going to talk to your employee, or your SCM team is going to talk to your partners for purchase and all that. Those are non-transactional. That is not reaching out to your end consumer for business purposes. Let's keep in the back of the mind that all these regulations started because of scam and fraud. So those kind of calls where you're reaching out to your employees or your partners, they need not be using 1600 or 140 or anything of that kind. It's only when you're reaching out to your customers, you need to be cautious about what number you're going to use. The third point I also want to touch upon is the inbound call restriction. There was a lot of debate about allowing inbound call on 1600, but for reasons of delay, there was finally a call taken that 1600 will be utilized only for outbound as of now. There'll not be any inbound calls. Now this means in your setup, in your use cases, you now have to have two different numbers, one for inbound, one for outbound. Is it going to throw up new challenges? I guess yes, because if my Axis Bank relationship manager or ICICI relationship manager calls me, and if I cannot call him back on the same number, I don't even know where to call, right? And currently, thing seems interesting because there's only 1,000 numbers per circle per operator. So in a way, what we are trying to say is that I will control the number of DIDs given to a bank. Thereby, Since it's not available and it is registered and given only to registered entities, the spam and the fraud will come down and the trust will get created. This is the thought process. Correct me, Adya, if I'm going wrong here, right? The whole idea what government is thinking is, okay, I'll give lesser numbers to only the registered entities. So the fraud who used to do fraud is no more able to get the number, and so hence the fraud will come down. But I still see a challenge there, because if there are some 13,000, 14,000 registered entities, I as a end user will not remember so many numbers. So in a way, 1,000 numbers of limited allocation to the telcos is good, but I think other areas where we need to see, for example, debt collection. This is one of the most debated topic, and my individual perspective on debt collection is that it should not be using 1600, because we know that people don't pick up the calls. And I have been talking to a couple of my customers who say, hey, listen, if you're not allowing me to make a call to a guy who has taken loan from me and owes me money, then I'll have to physically send somebody to his address, and that's going to be even worse, sir. This is what we are hearing from the market, but I think that's a larger debate. So there is limited number series and also debt recovery, which is going to be a bigger point of debate going forward. So this is where we stand as of now. So let me also get to a little more in detail. Can we have the slide change, please? Yeah, thank you. What I would also request you all to think through from your company perspective is, as of now, as we see, there's no clarity on whether the branches which you have in remote parts of India or even in the city should have 1600 number. Now, the whole purpose is control the number, and then let's say a bank X calls any one of us. We know that it is bank X. That will fail if you don't make sure that your branches also use the same number. Now, there has to be a balance. Now, let's say if you have 4,000 branches, 5,000 branches all over India, how do you enable those 2,000 branches? Maybe you have a PRI or a PBX or some kind of a setup there. There are also executives sitting there. There are field agents who go around for collections. There are field agents who do KYC. Are you going to ask them to use 1600, or are they allowed to use normal numbers? If they are using normal numbers, then again the spam and the trust factor will go down. If they are centralized to use 1600, then what is the technology you're going to use? How are you going to avoid the spam? These are complaints. I mean, there are a lot of options which will open up. Of course, I don't have a magic pill here. Depending on your size of the business and your specific type of deployments you have, or number of branches you have, or the business model you have, I think it is good for you to go through your own organization setup, not just from the perspective of adopting 1600, but also from the perspective of where all you want to adopt, and what is the tech readiness for that. That is something which I really want you all to take it home. And if there's any help needed, I'm sure our teams will also publish you our numbers and whatnot, right? So you can probably reach out to us. But broadly, what I'm saying is there is no clarity. At the same time, you as an organization need to take that call where all you want to use 1600 based on whatever is your business plan and the consumers and the model and all that. The other point is about OSP. Most of the banks today have other service provider registration. Now, the numbers which have been allocated are considered as wireline numbers. There is also a debate which is going around saying that we should be considering it as IP telephony numbers or mobile numbers. Now, to be keeping it simple, if it is called a wireline number, then the number can work only within that city. For example, 080, that can work only within that city. Whereas when you use mobile number, because of number roaming allowed, you can use anywhere. So I'll not like to go too much into detail about what is IP telephony and what is wireline. Both look similar, but from a OSP standpoint, there is a difference. Again, depending on your how large your organization is, what all OSP registrations you have done, where all you need enablement. I don't have a magic pill, so I may not be able to tell you that this is how you should do it, but this is a pointer that you should ask the question whether the number 1600 is being considered as wireline from whoever is giving you, and then set it right, or look at the OSP impact. Do please look at redundancies. As of now, you would have built a network over a long period, unless you are a very recent company into the market. You would have built networks over 15 years, 10 years, and it's probably not possible to overnight identify where all the redundancies have to be built, but you will have to look into it. Now, given all these discussions, number inventory, the numbers being allocated lesser, the debt collection calls, and all that being a bigger part of debate, is it going to be at the branch level also, or field force also, and all that, which is still being debated? Tries of the opinion that it should be adopted to the industry's expectation, something like that. So there's no black and white agreement on that. Given all that, there is a potential deadline extension possible, but I would not recommend you to go through the speculation which I'm doing. I agree that it's something on the cards, but it's always good to go and see how fast you can become regulatory compliant. Let me move to the next slide. I also wanted to take a minute and try to give you what is the action an operator is supposed to take. Now, Adya touched upon digital ledger technology and the blockchain. That actually enabled us to do a lot of things. Firstly, in 1600, there is not going to be any scrubbing. That means you can make calls to anybody. Unlike in 140, the scrubbing happens to those people who have not given you the consent, or they are fully blocked, and the call will not go in 140. Whereas in 1600, there is no scrubbing which is going to happen. That means you can make a call to anybody. As long as they're reachable, you can make a call to anybody. I also talked about cross sell, upsell being a complaint. Now let's say there is a complaint. There is a complaint of some kind. Either it is on 1600 or on the normal number. 140 does not lead to complaint because there is already a scrubbing mechanism and the call will never go. Thereby, you cannot get a complaint. That's our opinion. So 1600 on the wire line, if there is a complaint, the expectation is the customer complains within 7 days. If he complains after 7 days, the consumer complains after 7 days, it is considered as a report, not as a complaint. He just made a note and considered as a report, not as a complaint. That, of course, suppose if you are using Airtel number, you will complain to Airtel. That is called terminating operator. Now, let's suppose that number calling was done by Jio. Airtel will send that complaint to Jio, which is the originating operator. Now, that originating operator will send it to your company, that is Bank X, right? So, your company will get a complaint saying that this is the subscriber who has complained on DND. This is the first portion. So, the top line, if you see, is customer raises a complaint. The terminating operator investigates and sends it to originating operator, and the originating operator investigates and sends it to the end customer. There's also one more unique thing which they have introduced. They've told the originating operator that you please do an analysis of last 10 days. Suppose if you see 5 or more than 5 complaints, suspend first, investigate later. Suppose if the number of complaints are lesser than 5, then investigate. In a way, what they are trying to say is, listen, I've given you enough of this one. You guys will take the complaint, then you'll go back and then you'll give us the proof after so many days. And we've lost time, and then there is only justification after justification which is happening. So I'm giving you a logic. 5 or more than 5 complaints, go ahead and suspend the customer first, and then go ahead and investigate. So this is the kind of seriousness which they are working upon. Telcos and all the fraternity, including the banks, are giving the feedback about how stringent this is becoming. 5 complaints are lower. So all that may change. But for now, this is the regulation. First violation is 15 days of suspension. Second violation is 1 year of blacklisting across all operators. That is the penalty. There is financial penalties also, but then this is the thing which we believe is most impacting our business. So I've written about it. Let me also go to the next slide, where I have just shown you for your benefit different series which has been allocated to different operators. So for example, if you look at Bharti Airtel, it will start with 1600, 100, 101, 102, 103, like that for 21 different circles. They've got it till 1600, 121. Reliance has got 200, Vodafone 300, 400, Tata 300, BSNL 001. And then there are two operators, Quadrant and Satsilio, which is 510 and 500. The other two operators are yet to get it. So if you look at the right side, depending on number of circles, each of them have about 22,000 numbers, except for Satsilio and the Quadrant. They have 1,000 numbers each. Now what it means is, I wanted to quantify the number shortage. Each operator has 22,000 numbers, and he is likely to give, somebody is talking about 1, somebody is talking about 3, somebody is talking about 5. So that's what they're talking about. So probably 5 or sometimes even more. DOT has also assured that if the numbers are falling short after consumption, they will give more. But for now, this is what is the inventory they have, right? So I just shared this for your interest. Next slide, please. Now, we talked about complaint, right? Now, the point is, we talked about implicit, explicit, we talked about upsell, cross sell. But in spite of all of that, there are going to be some complaints, right? Those complaints have to be you. You have to prove that this is a valid call, right? So how are you going to prove? Most generally, we used to use customer name, mobile number, CRM screenshot, date of consent, logs of the company, all that as the proof, right? But because we are going into a regime which is even more stringent than what it used to be, we are also recommending, and most of the operators are recommending, that call recording be kept for all those calls to prove that there was no upsell, cross sell, and also there was a proper transaction. Now, you will definitely have use cases which are proper service and transaction use cases. There is no mixing of any other kind. In spite of that, there is a likelihood that there is a D&D complaint. And for that, if you have the recording, it will be very useful. So these are thoughts which we have given from our perspective for your readiness of the infra, let's say. I would like to give back the control to Adya to talk more about the regulation part.
Thank you, Vivek, sir. So, you know, just to kind of add on to what you said, right? And I think you took everybody very helpfully through the complaint mechanism. But I think if you look at the corresponding compliance requirement, both at a technology level, but also at an operational level, there's a need to develop a strategy to be able to address complaints or to be able to demonstrate compliance. So yes, there's the technical bits. There's also a need for companies to look at timelines, appoint teams who can manage the tech. Because if you look at the amendment, 2025 amendment very closely, right? Yes, the onus is on telecom service providers, but they're very short timelines, sometimes 2 business days, sometimes 1 business day to respond to complaints or to respond to requests. So when thinking about compliance, a technical strategy married with an internal SOP becomes very important to manage complaints, because should you not meet these timelines appropriately, there's a risk of suspension. And, Vivek sir took us through that, flow chart, it's a little, frankly, it's a little frightening, right? So that's something that your SOPs need to account for. Another interesting aspect is the fact that robocalls and auto dialers have found a mention in the 2025 amendment. They're not prohibited anymore, but they're two important aspects that we should highlight. The first one is that any company that is adopting a robocall or an auto dialer needs to disclose it to the originating access provider. Now, what that format of the disclosure is going to be, how often do we need to make the disclosure, the amendment is unclear about. But just again, while evolving a compliance strategy and SOPs, please keep in mind that there are certain disclosure requirements that arise. So you should also assess the robocalls and auto dialers that you all have in place. Now, the voice calls, and I think I mentioned this, right? And Vivek sir did take us through the numbering sequence. But I think what we are going to see over the next couple of months and years is an increased scrutiny on voice calls that very honestly have historically sat outside of the regulatory ambit because they've been a little hard to kind of regulate. But what is happening with the amendment right now is that access providers or telecom service providers are being pushed to operationalize mechanisms for administering the voice calls, allotting phone numbers, having those voice call recordings that Vivek sir mentioned. So just your days of, I think, the slight Wild West when it comes just to the voice calls, that's I think in the past right now. Couple of other things, right? Which is that, and I did touch upon this, have your complaints investigation SOP in place. Do keep in mind that should this not be in place, there are chances of immediate suspension. Repeated violations can lead to a suspension of all your telecom services, coupled with being blacklisted from all telecom service providers. So I think the risks are a little higher right now. There have been, that there has been enforcement in a slightly scattered mechanism, but I do believe that enforcement is going to pick up. Also, if anybody in the audience runs call management apps, important to think through how your call management apps are going to function, what can be blocked and what can't be blocked, because there's certain types of calls that cannot be blocked by call management apps at the moment. So again, while evolving compliance strategies, assess the calls, assess your services, and assess your SOPs to meet your readiness requirements. Couple of other things. The digital consent acquisition process was met with, I wouldn't be, amiss to say that it was met with a lot of controversy and a lot of concern last year and the year before that. Effectively, what happens is TRI has developed a new strategy for a business to be able to collect consent. How this works is you've got specific short code numbers that are provided by telecom service providers, specifically beginning with 127, that are then used by companies to send consent seeking messages. Those consent seeking messages and the content within those messages do need to be pre-approved and registered with your respective telecom service provider. The consent that is sought, either via clicking a URL or an OTP by an end user, is recorded on the DLT platform. It also practically impacts and really significantly impacts the way businesses in India have historically legally got consent. A lot of businesses have got away with implied consent or pushing in your consent language within a 20-page terms and conditions or privacy policy that even I, as a lawyer, do not read as a consumer. But the point is that the DCA mechanism is going to change the way we think about processes legal compliance, specifically in regulatory compliance, while dealing with customer preferences and interactions. That said, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I do know the implementation of the DCA is a little not set in stone. So it does give us a little amount of room for flexibility. The last bit before we move on to the questions is, of course, the elephant in the room when it comes to how do we think about TRI-UCC compliance coupled with India's new Digital Personal Data Protection Act? For some of the non-lawyers perhaps in the audience, for some background, India has introduced a new Digital Personal Data Protection Act that requires businesses to collect consent of end users when sending them or when processing their data. Now, the DPDPA is not yet in force. There have been draft rules that have been under discussion. What is important to note about the DPDPA is that the standards for consent are very much like your DCA requirements in the sense that they're explicit, right? So your consent collection processes have to be much more granular than they have been under existing law or market practice. Secondly, the penalties under the DPDPA are probably some of the highest penalties we are seeing across all laws right now. So the penalties can go up to 250 crores. So obviously there is a risk assessment that needs to be brought into all of your processes where you're dealing with end user data. Thirdly, the DPDP is not yet in force. There have been draft rules for circulation. What you can expect is that the rules that will implement the law will be finalized this year. And over the next 18 to 24 months, you can expect this law to be operationalized. The reason I bring up the DPDPA is that it does bleed into your commercial communication and your unsolicited commercial communication regulatory strategy. The consent requirements are extremely difficult. And while the law does permit other laws, such as the UCC regulations or the digital lending guidelines, that have been issued by the RBI, to take precedence over the DPDPA, where there are gaps in what consent is, the higher standard will prevail. What that means is, if the CPR says consent and doesn't define what consent is, and then you compare it against the DPDPA, the DPDPA's definitions of consent are extremely difficult for businesses to comply. So what you will eventually have to do is evolve your compliance strategies to make sure that you are meeting the standards of the new data protection law coupled with your TRI requirements and your DOT requirements. This is not to alarm anybody. And the point is that compliance is going to be tough. What does worry me as somebody who advises on regulatory, matters and compliance, it takes time to build these solutions. It takes time to adopt these solutions, and it takes time to implement these solutions internally. So if you are thinking about consent, if you are thinking about customer interactions, it's a good idea to get ahead of the curve and start factoring in your digital personal data protection aspects into your strategy, because you'll just be reinventing the wheel a couple of months from now. With that, I am going to stop here, and I know there have been a bunch of questions. So, Namrata, how do we do this? Would you maybe like to moderate the questions?
Actually, I think Vivek sir has, already answered a lot of
Oh,
questions
perfect.
while you were presenting. So yeah, I think there is a question that has come. This is a service request for which customer has approached the business. Maybe you just answered something for Gaurav, Vivek sir, and he has posted it. But yeah,
Yeah. So
please, yeah,
I think there are two questions which are coming up, right?
yeah.
Very
Now one more, yes.
clearly.
So
What
let me just read it out. So this is a follow-up question. I think Gaurav has put it, which is a service request for which customer is approached. Yes, we will try and share the deck post the session. Uh, Pradeep has asked a question. Since we are in the finance industry, only the 160 series should be used for transactional or service calls. To clarify, can we use this series when a customer approaches us by filling out the website form or lead form or downloading our applications, provided we have their consent or OTP verification? Once verified, are we allowed to call from 1600 series and guide them through the application process, document requirements, and take them through the sanction and disbursement? And it's a long question, but I hope got a
Yeah.
gist of it.
So basically, let me generalize this question, right? What people are asking is, if there is an inbound call, if there is a kind of consent, can I use 1600 or should I use 140? Are you going to still because we talked about upsell, cross sell being considered as a promotional call. Now the question is, if there's an inbound call and the customer was trying to do a KYC, he got struck and he dropped off, and now you're trying to call him back with the 1600 number, and you're still telling him, okay, listen, I'm helping you to cross the this one. Are you interested or not? That right? Now, historically, when you go back, I think this was the major thing which happened, that everybody started using normal numbers for upsell, cross sell with the disguise of service and transaction. That is why we said in our discussion that you please keep a recording. Let me give you a scenario. Let's say there is an inbound call. The customer called me and said, okay, call me back. Now your agent calls him and the agent says, hey, hello, I'm Vivek here. I'm calling you from so and so company. You dropped off from this one. Should you want my help? You asked me to call you back. So do you want my help? Let's say he says no and you disconnect the call. You now have the recording to prove that there was an instance you did not sell anything further. You just made a service call, right? So I think this clarity will come out. Only point I would say is, if you have digital consent or explicit or an implicit consent from the customer, then I think you should use 1600 and not worry about it. With your CRM snapshot, existing relationship, call recording, you will be able to prove it. But if I were to believe that the regulation is going to be becoming stringent, then upsell, cross sell will put you into a problem. So try to keep upsell, cross sell separated, not part of the service and transaction. That is our recommendation. That is one. Second question, which I'm seeing Namrata and Adya, is around our favorite topic of numbers getting spammed, because collection, especially, what we have seen is people don't pick up the call. So there is this Truecaller spam, Airtel warning, and so many other things which reflect it as spam. So the good news is that regulator has also explicitly mentioned that any calling application should not block 1600 number calls or make any arrangements. However, there is a clause which says, unless it is opted on its own by the end consumer. Because I think Adya, you are the right person to talk about it. We are a free country, we are a democratic country. So I have the right to choose what call I want to receive or not. That being said, an application, somebody else who has developed an application and that is blocking 1600 is, without my knowledge, is not something which is the right thing, and that's what probably regulator is saying. So even make it more even relevant, if Truecaller spamming, Airtel spamming and all that is going to happen, there is a regulatory stance taken on it. How well it will transform, we'll have to wait and watch. We'll have to see how 1600 is going to come up. And then we'll have to see whether, because 160, see, collections calls have a tendency to block it. Now, if you block a 1600 number and there is a fraud prevention call which is going to come to you, it is against the idea of protecting the end consumer. So I think there will be some call taken on collections and all that. Basis that I think we should look at what is going to happen. But right now, this is what it is. Ajay, you want to add anything else to this?
No, but I also think nothing more to add, just that we'll have to wait and watch because it's a balancing act. The regulator has clearly been very concerned about spam and phishing and scamming. So how that will balance against the type of calls, we'll just have to wait and watch.
Yeah, I just want to say that, I think there are 15 questions pending, but we would like to cover them as much as possible. But if something gets missed out, please feel free to reach out to us. Um, if you can see, there's a question. 1600 is applicable only for calls, right? Somebody's
That,
asking this.
yeah.
All right.
And,
So that,
I did see a message that said that our entity deals with multiple products like, say, insurance, mutual funds, and UBIs. Should there be a different number based on products, or can it still be the same? I would just say legally, I think the regulator is very clear that different lines of business need to be treated separately. So, just legally, I would think that you would need separate structures for compliance for each line of business. Now, Vivek sir, I think what the amendment is unclear about is for different line of businesses for the same entity. Can you use the same number?
So my opinion is that the 1600 number should be allocated against the PE.
Mhm.
Now the PE registration takes care of the PAN and SIN, and we don't allow duplication there.
Yeah.
Given that if it is a single entity with three different products, then I guess they can use the same number. That's my opinion, though. I agree to what you're saying from a business point of view. They have tried to keep it separate, but I'm also looking at the operational challenges, Adya. Suppose, see, insurance and collections and all of these have their own nuances,
So,
right? So now, if you use a number for collections, it is more likely get spammed or somehow blocked or whatever it is. And if you use a number for insurance on the same number you use for fraud prevention, I don't know how people are going to pick up. But we'll have to actually wait, is what I feel, because we had a tendency till now. 080 is Bangalore number, 022 is
yeah.
Mumbai number, but that tendency is going to go away. So I'm not able to probably visualize right now as to how it is going to transform. That's my opinion.
And I do see another question that says, do you have an ETA for the actual implementation? Is this something y'all are hearing from?
The government has said the ETA is 31st of March, but incidentally, I don't think anyone of us are ready. Everybody is working hard and trying to bring down the timelines. That's where I gave the example of it is likely to get extended. But let's say it is 31st of March. I think more or less we should be ready by that time.
one more question. Somebody has asked Shubham, how to implement digital consent and will Exotel help for it?
Yeah, so digital consent is primarily used for the promotional calling. If you want to use it and you want help from Exeter, we will do that.
Okay. Yeah, another one from Nasir Ahmed. Dialer, which we use it for, is for collections, mainly for delinquent payments. Does these calls need to route via 1600 or can it continue via existing numbers?
I am assuming delinquent payment is still meaning it is.
It's still yeah.
Um, it should use 1600 as of now.
Okay. I have an existing, Sunny has asked, I have an existing SIP trunk from telecom operators like Tata, Tele, Jio, Airtel, BSNL. Can I add 140 and 160 service on the current SIP trunk?
Depends on the operator. There are variations. Somebody is saying I can add, somebody is saying I cannot add, somebody is saying I'll add, but I'll not allow inbound. So many variations are there in the market today. I think we should wait for some more time. We must also understand that when the regulation and all that has been stringently given certain timelines, the telcos won't have got enough time to go back to all the operators and think through, or all the customers and think through. Although there was a lot of effort done both by banks, joint committee of regulators, and the telcos, um, there's some clarity missing. I don't have a yes or no answer. I think you should definitely reach out to each of them and take. But there's nothing stopping from a regulatory standpoint. That much I can tell you.
Okay. And Arvind has asked, I have 15 centers pan India calling from different state. So will there be same number as PE or different number for each state?
Right now, different number for each state. That is the clarity which is missing in one of the points I talked about, whether this is going to be considered as an IP-centric number or a wireline number. If it is considered as a wireline number, each of those banks or each of those states should have a different number. But if it's considered as IP-centric, you can have a single number.
Okay.
I also would bring in a little different angle here, right? Again, in this, if it is considered as wireline, then the next set of questions is it going to be work from office for you or is it going to be work from home for you? If it is work from home, you can still use the same number. So you'll have to interpret the allocation of the operator with your OSP guideline and OSP registration. I can actually take this call separately instead of confusing the whole team. I can take this discussion separately and help you design the network for you.
Right. I think we are just about entering the time limit, 2 minutes, and there are still 15 unanswered questions. But we would request all of you to just put the questions, in the survey link that will be, shared with all of you, because practically not possible to address everybody. Somebody has asked, Akshay has asked, can you summarize what 1600 is supposed to be used for? Super confused.
Akshay class 1600. So 1600 is to be used for BFSI segment service and transaction calls. Service and transactional calls would mean KYC onboarding, payment reminder, renewal reminder, or OTP and all that. If you want more details, we can share with you. For the lack of time, maybe we are not able to give you more insights.
All right. Okay, I think we have 5 more minutes. We can take it up. Could you please help on the clarity around robo outcalling for services?
So, robocalling or dial calling for services is allowed. That has been clearly called out in the regulation that there is no further. This one, however, for the promo, they have given certain set of directions saying that operators should check the number of calls per minute, the unique numbers, and there are some regulations which they are coming out with. However, for that service and transaction, they have clearly said, okay, it depends on the volume of customers and the transaction happening at that point of time. So dialer calling has been allowed.
Okay. Rajesh has asked, I have 1800 number for my process, which is for customer care. Do I have to take 1600?
See, if your number is 1800 is used primarily for inbound calls. So 1600 does not allow inbound calls. So you're going to only receive 1800 and inbound calls. You don't really need 1600 number. However, if you are a BFSI, the RBI and the SEBI and all these guys are also running behind you saying that give us a confirmation, the field officer especially, give us a confirmation that you are in an adherence, give us a confirmation you are in adherence and all that. From that perspective, it is a good idea to take 1600 number and keep it with you. Although it will serve no purpose for you, it's at least as of now.
Right. Very interesting question, Vivek sir, right now. I see Ashish has asked, do AI agent tool used for sale or collection would require 140, 1600 respectively?
Uh,
The AI agent tool, will
uh,
that also require?
Sales is a promotional call and collection, debated that it is probably a call which is going to be done on 1600 or normal numbers. AI, you can always implement. There'll be some kind of a restriction on promotional, as I said about CPS, number of times you call and all that, but there'll be no such restriction on the service.
Okay. Deepika has asked, under the new regulations, service calls concerning ongoing purchase need explicit consent, and there is a timeline of 7 days for this explicit consent. Does this mean that post the 7 days, we need to get the consent again? But if we use the 1600 series, consent is not required.
No, not like that. So what they have said is that if you are trying to reach out, the service call itself has been divided into two. One is where you are trying to onboard a KYC and all that. The second is where there is a transaction and it was dropped half the way. So let's say, you know, an example could be you trying to buy something, you paid, but you created an account, you tried payment and it failed. Okay, now you're not paid also. If you're paid, then you become an existing customer. If you're not paid, but you've tried to do it, now that is a trans call with explicit consent for 7 days.
I think that is the rule of thumb, right? It's about nudging customers to finish a transaction. In that particular case, you would need explicit consent. In other scenarios where you're reminding them about payments, for instance, you're reminding them about warranty information, for instance, those you do not need explicit consent for.
All right. Can Lakshman has asked, can non-BFSI buy this series? There may be outsourced to BPO. Can non-BFSI buy the series?
I mean, non-BFSI will not be allocated 1600 number. It will be the BFSIs who will be allocated 1600 number.
Okay. Abhishek has asked, is DCA to be captured for commercial communication today? I see other businesses making communication without taking DCA. How should I go about it for my organization?
If it is promotional calls and you want to reach customers who are in D&D block list, you should take DCA.
Okay. And how will it work for debt collection? Akashdeep has asked.
So Adya, you want to
Our-
give a different view?
I think we've touched upon this,
Yeah.
and it's debt recovery. Look at your processes. There are question marks. Arguably would fall within the scope of transaction messages, but there is a wait and see approach. There are operational challenges. This is to quickly summarize what Vivek sir was saying.
The connectivity or the connect rate will drop significantly. Any workaround or process to tackle this? Arvind has asked this question. Will it drop
Connectivity,
significantly?
connectivity will not drop for 1600. On the other hand, with proper education, which will be carried out by TRI and the operators and everybody, it is likely going to increase. The reason is today, as an end consumer, I'm just making a very end consumeristic, debate here. As an end consumer, if I didn't even know who's calling, uh, either using Truecaller or Airtel spam or nothing, I would just pick the call, or I'm in a meeting, I would not pick the call, etc., etc. Now, if a call is coming from 1600, first of all, there is no DND scrubbing. So all people will be allowed to call, irrespective of their status in the DND. So the call will come. Second, now I know that it is 1600. A bank of mine is calling me. And if we were to believe the regulation will be applied in letter and spirit by all of us in the industry, there's a high likelihood I know that somebody is reaching me to serve me. So I'm likely to pick it up. This is my opinion. Adya, Namrata, you can contradict my opinion if you like, but or we can wait and see how this is going to transform in the days to come.
No, I'm aligned.
All right. I think one last question. Shubham has been pinging. There's this, on and off, but let me just take this one last question, and the rest, like everybody has mentioned, we will build an FAQ and send it across as well as the presentation. Shubham has asked, cross-sell on inbound service calls. Will this come under the purview of a promotional call? That is question number one. And the question two, if consent is taken before initiating a cross-sell pitch on a service inbound call, will it still come under a purview of promotional call?
My understanding, Adya, correct me, and we can actually go back and look into
Look
this.
at it. Yeah.
My understanding currently says that if there is an outbound call, only then it qualifies for a DND.
I agree.
If it is an inbound call,
It doesn't.
it doesn't qualify for a D&D complaint because you might have read, I mean, somebody has published a real estate advertisement. I called that number because I was interested in calling that number. So because I've called, if if that particular agent talks about giving that information and also says, hey, listen, there is one more project. It also comes with home loan. It also comes with insurance. I don't think it can be considered as promotional because I gave the consent by making a call.
I agree with you. I don't think the regulations are not structured in a way where they can apply to inbound calls. That said, I would like to relook at the definitions to see if there's anything that gets triggered. But I principally agree with you.
So Shubham, I think we will come back to you, but for now, I think this is what is our opinion. But you're giving us more reasons to go back to read the document again.